Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality, disease-free years as possible. Well, thanks for joining me this week, and I decided not to follow up last week's show. We were talking about food engineering and eating green, and we talked about how cattle farming, including other types of meat farming, have eroded and really its impact on the environment. I decided to jump back into Dr. Bland's book this week, The Disease Delusion. I can't recommend this book enough to you guys. I think it's probably the best health book, educational book that I've read in maybe 10 or 20 years, The Disease Delusion. We're going to be talking today, if you remember way back when I did foundational shows on By Design. What I mean by that is there are 8 foundational subject matters, topics, that I wrote on a piece of paper when I was designing this show. We did toxification, for instance, inflammation, digestion, energy, stress. Those were a handful of the 8. You could go to my YouTube channel, go back to my early shows where I did, and you'll see in the title, it will say foundation. The rest of my shows are topical. The foundation shows I did with you many shows ago because I wanted to set a stage that the show was going to be built on a foundation. I'm a real structurally focused guy, meaning that if you're going to build a house, you hire an architect. You need plans. Well, our body is the same way. If we're going to redesign our body, if we're going to obtain better health or try for optimal health, we need to re-engineer. We need to take an architectural plan to this God-given design, because God gave us the infrastructure. He gave us the architecture. We have eroded it greatly, right? So Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible, and that's the Bible verse the show is based upon. We're going to go back to one of those 8. Dr. Bland did an amazing job in his book, Taking Apart Structure. One of the 8 primary things, one of the 8 subjects that we've discussed was on structure. And so many people I see day to day, I am blessed to go knee to knee with so many of you people with neck pain and back pain and knee pain and elbow pain and shoulder pain, and the plethora of why this happened to you should be in a multi-volume book that I'll write someday. It is amazing how many people hurt themselves through trauma or hurt themselves through something called micro-trauma. And micro-trauma are the things we do to ourselves every day that accumulate over time. Like a gentleman who sits on his wallet for 10 years and drives a truck. Eventually that wallet's going to cause you pelvic distortion, possibly leading to sciatic pain. Structure is easy to see in a pregnant gal. We watch, let's say 110, 115 pound woman gain 30, 40, 50 pounds over a 9-month period of time. We watch them change the way they walk. That's their gait. We watch them breathe differently. We watch the way they hold themselves up and out of a chair differently. So we can understand structure. So let's start structure. This is chapter 10 of Dr. Bland's book. Let's ask ourselves some questions. Do you feel you're getting shorter over time? Do you have back problems? Do you ever get a sore neck? How frequent? Have you ever been told you have elevated hemoglobin A1C? That's the blood value we talked about for type 2 diabetes. Do you have many memory problems, weight problems? Do you eat a lot of food and drinks that are stored in plastic containers? Are you cold all the time? Have you been told you have reduced bone mass, whether on an x-ray or a bone density study? Are you menopausal? Do you pretty much avoid dairy products? Do you eat proportionally way more animal protein than vegetables? So what Dr. Bland is doing is we're going to talk about structure, but he went in, and this is a very big brain science guy, so I'm going to save you a lot of the studies and kind of pick through this. But there was a study that was done in 1951, National Academy of Sciences. And the reason it's important is because a chemist by the name of Linus Pauling was part of it. Now, I blogged on Linus Pauling years ago about being a true genius, and I don't use that word much. I think it's way overly used in our society. But when I read, for instance, what people like Einstein, Pauling, the kind of work that they did in their life, I tend to take notice. And Pauling's research was on the structure and the relationship of the way proteins function in your body, and he's the father of what we call molecular medicine. Now, hang tight. Please don't change the channel. I'm not going to go too deep here, but we're going to take our by design brains and stretch them a little bit, because we're going to be talking about something that maybe I'm pretty sure you've never really thought about before. Pauling basically stated that underneath the structure of human physiology is basically the molecular level, and we can understand how and why it functions as it does. So in other words, if we understand structure, okay, of the human body at a molecular level, we can understand function. This is very important, because if we get the structure right, and the function will follow. So that's what Pauling said. Let's look at the structure, because then the function of human physiology will follow. Because we think of physiological structure as our skeleton, our muscles, our connective tissue, right, our organs, and we think of it being permanent, but it's not. These systems are replaced on a regular basis. Our red blood cells every 3 months, our digestive tract every few days, and our bones every few years are being replaced. Our bodies are in a constant state of flux. They're in a constant state of change. It's the way the designer designed us. Okay? So at a molecular level, of the smallest building blocks of those structural elements are proteins. So the very nature, the very essence of what God created in every single one of us is proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of these structural elements. So when you think of a bone, you think of a heart, a kidney, a small intestine. If you break it down to a molecular level, this is stuff you see under a microscope, okay? We are now talking about proteins. And so if you look at it, guys, I always say we're only as healthy as the health of our proteins, right? In other words, our structure is always changing. That part we know. And structure affects function. And we also know each one of the building blocks of the structure and function in the body are proteins. So if we could see how what we do affects the proteins, then you could correlate and say the relationship of the protein is that to structure and function. So it's really, really insightful, the relationship between structure and function. And that is our structure at every level can change. We come to understand how function can therefore change as a result. So if we change the structure, we're going to make a better functioning body. And God gave us the blueprint. He gave us the plan to do this. So think about, what is this thing called structure? And I hate to take this miracle of life called the human body and simplify it into architecture, but I need to do it so I get my point across. If we think about a building like a skyscraper, the human body is engineered for stability, and so is a skyscraper, right? They're able to withstand the power of nature, the force of gravity over time, and to remain upright. But now, if we take that skyscraper and we give it the ability to move, think about that. The engineering for stability that went into it when it was stationary, okay, will it still be adequate for when the building is moving? Probably not, right? So keeping the structural components aligned is much more complicated in a moving building than a stationary one. So think about us. The skyscraper must not only maintain its stability when it's in motion, at the same time, it must keep all of the functioning operating systems like communication, repair, and engineering together. But that's exactly the way God created us. A building can't move, it can't think, it can't self-repair. The human body is so complex, guys, that it has an architectural structure in it that allows it to not only withstand the forces of nature, remain upright, withstand the forces of gravity, but it could also move. And that in of itself is the miracle of life. It's the miracle of creation. So what happens is, if we take this biological structure, right, and now we put life into the mix, we're going to put events in our lives that cause us at some point to distort the alignment, misaligned bones and muscles. You probably had sore necks and sore elbows out there. And when it comes to structural alignment, when it's altered by definition, the function is altered. Pain is one of those alterations. Okay, so many people develop pain without having any trauma. That's because they've altered the structure, which then alters the function. Okay, and it's even so in the appearance of inflammation in the body. So the skyscraper is one of those things, when you compare it to a human being, and I hate to do that, but I had to. When you look at the architectural design of the human body, we are able to withstand so much and still have the ability to move. Then when we have this altered structure, right, which is altering function, many of us, either go to our doctors and we get medicine, for instance, pain medicine, anti-inflammatory medicine, muscle relaxers, or if we want to go the more natural, holistic routes, we go to therapeutic massage or a chiropractor or an osteopathy, for instance, or forms of exercise, right, and acupuncture. And these forms of therapies have been studied very intensively over the last 40 to 60 years, especially recently. And the evidence is overwhelming that the reason that manual medicine works, hands-on therapy, is because you're addressing the structure. And by addressing the structure, correcting structure, improving structure, you're improving function. And I really hope that message is coming across through the radio, okay? Because it's such an incredible, researched, documented thing that so many of us live our lives, take it for granted that we maybe are getting shorter in stature, right? We have kind of daily pain. We're living with it. Maybe some memory problems. Maybe we're a bit overweight, right? Maybe we're menopausal. All those things I said initially. Well, we have altered structure, which is impairing the function. So the core message of Pauling, and Corey was the other person involved in this study, was that alteration in the structure of a protein can then modify the function of that protein and therefore the individual. So remember, we're going down to the molecular level. Pauling termed this as molecular disease. And this is very different and distinguished from infectious disease. Now follow me, guys. Infectious disease over the last 100 years is that you kill the foreign invader. You kill it, which causes the disease, right? You kill it with an antibiotic, and that's what modern medicine is. It's basically looking at infectious disease as the root cause of our problems. But here's the problem, and this is the difference between molecular-oriented disease and infectious disease. Molecular disease, you cannot kill a protein produced in the body, even if it has a different structure from other proteins. So from a medical point of view, managing a molecular disease, okay, deriving from the altered structure of molecules, requires a very different strategy from the pharmaceutical approach that you could zap foreign organisms, as Dr. Bland is demonstrating in his book. All right, so it's a very different mindset. Now, over the last bunch of weeks, we were talking about chronic illness. So let's kind of bring this all together. Chronic disease is a result of the alteration in the shape of these specific proteins. Now you know what they are, these specific proteins, right? Which make up the structure and impairs function. Now, not all of these alterations by any means are a result of genetic characteristics, like sickle cell anemia, for instance. That is a change of the specific protein in sickle cell anemia. That's a genetic thing. Let's forget about genetics for a second here. We're going to rather look at these diseases from the alteration that occurs in the protein cell, okay, that's produced in the body. So here we are in the molecular state, these proteins, their changes these modifications are derived from factors and events in the individual's lifestyle, in the individual's diet, and in the individual's environment. This means, guys, we're not born with a genetically abnormal protein. You are eating and living and altering those proteins, which then changes structure, which then changes function, which then causes chronic illness. Now, one of the best ways, and I'm not going to get into this, is complicated biochemistry, to understand the examples of altered form of the protein is hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin protein, called A1C, which is how you measure typically type 2 diabetes, which is epidemic in our society, is the direct byproduct of what we're talking about today, which is altered structure, altered function at a molecular level. Gee, I guess you tuned in today and maybe you didn't think you'd be learning about molecular medicine, okay? But in 16 minutes, I tried to do the best job that I can of taking extremely complicated science. Linus Pauling is a genius. The research that was done and the level of knowledge that he gave clinicians who were out in the field like myself is just such a blessing. God's design, God's structure, God's function was created, and all science ever does is prove that fact. Thank you for listening to me, Dr. James Proodian, and the By Design radio program. Please go to my YouTube channel if you want to catch up on any of those earlier shows, and go to ProodianHealthcare.com to find all of those various sites. Have a blessed week, and thank you for listening.